إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Inshallah, in the next 45 minutes or less, we will talk and hopefully we can benefit and remind one another with regards to the most important thing, which is the Salah. And in the previous weeks, it was also about the Salah and the conditions of the Salah and the pillars of the Salah. And inshallah ta'ala, today briefly, even though the topic is a lifetime learning because it has to do with the heart, so we'll talk about it inshallah ta'ala, how our Salah should be according to the way of the Prophet ﷺ when it comes to healing and purifying our soul and really fulfilling the objective aspect of the Salah. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He ordered us in the Quran, He ordered us to establish the Salah. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ. And iqamatul salah is different than just making the salah. Iqamatul salah, to establish the salah, is to do it with its pillars and conditions and with its khushu', with the deeds done by the heart, and of course with the foundation of matters of al-iman. And the question is that do we sincerely and truthfully want to have the essence and the khushu' and the purification of the soul that the salah is all about? This is the most important act of our life. If we are truthful in this, then there's a way to it. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not leave us like this without giving us everything that we need to attain the highest level of goodness. And since the salah is the most important act after At-Tawheed, after embracing the deen of Islam, and this is by the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, that it's the first thing that people will be asked about in the Day of Judgment, is one's Salah. And as far as this obligation is concerned, it's every day, 5 times a day. Once a person reaches the age of puberty, till the moment of death. Every day it has to be fulfilled, has to be perfected, and this is the job. This is the job that we need to fulfill first and foremost, and then everything else, things start to have a meaning to it after we perfect our salah. So we're not going to talk about the physical aspects of it, because this is something that has been talked about, and we have to definitely to learn about it all the time. But the subject of what's supposed to be in the heart and how to implement the salah in our life the way it ought to be. I would start with something very straightforward and simple, since the first level of any actions is the physical action. And then after that, the heart gets involved as a result of the physical actions. What I mean by this is, قالت الأعراب آمنا قل لم تؤمنوا ولكن قولوا أسلمنا ولما يدخل الإيمان في قلوبكم. The Arab, the Bedouin, some of them, they said, we آمنا, we believed. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to them, no, but rather say aslamna, we became Muslims. And the iman still did not get to enter your hearts. So the level of al-Islam comes first, and then the level of al-Iman, and the highest level of the deen is al-Ihsan, which is the highest level of the deen. So the same thing in any act of worship, the 3 levels need to be observed. So someone that starts his salah today, he can be in the level of al-Islam. Someone become a Muslim and he start to establish the salah. He's within the level of al-Islam. And the more that he continue to establish the salah the way it ought to be, then that takes him to the level of al-Iman, then the level of al-Ihsan, which is the highest level. So we want to have the level of al-Ihsan in our salah, which is as defined by the Prophet ﷺ, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. That you worship Allah as if you see Allah. And if you don't see Allah, you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is seeing you. And the statement, أن تعبد الله, that you worship Allah. And the most important act of worship is the salah. الصلاة خير موضوع. So if there is anything that we can talk about the level of al-ihsan to be established in, is the salah. First and the most important thing is how to reach the level of al-ihsan in the salah. It's the same thing of how to reach that level in every aspect of our life. So we have to take the level of al-Islam first, seriously, fulfilling the commands of Allah, and that would take us by the will of Allah, since everything is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also what is meant by that is the deen of al-Islam is very easy by the will of Allah. Easy for the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for. There's no complications in it. There's no too much deep complexities in it. Just as simple as the word al-Islam, which is again the first level, the most, the aqd al-Iman, the covenant of al-Iman is based on what? Submitting oneself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the tawheed, submitting oneself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in obedience. If there is no submission to the obedience of Allah, then there's a disease in the heart. We need to go back and fix that one first. So what is the meaning of al-istislam lillah? You submit yourself to whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to do. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to establish the salah, then physically we are in that state of submission. So this is a must and it has to be done. And this is in the capacity of everyone. So when it's time for the salah, then we drop everything, we leave everything, and we physically go to the salah. And if someone says, I can't, that means there's no physical, unless there's a physical excuse. So the adhan of the salah is given, then what is the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع. If the call of the salah in the day of Jumu'ah is called, فاسعوا, go diligently to the salah, وذروا البيع, and leave the transactions and buying and selling and so on. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised the believers, في بيوت أذن الله أن ترفع ويذكر فيها اسمه يسبح له فيها بالغدو والآصال رجال لا تلهيهم تجارة ولا بيع عن ذكر الله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة يخافون يوما تتقلب فيه القلوب والأبصار. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the believers after the famous ayah of the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentioned in the houses of Allah في بيوت أذن الله أن ترفع, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted for the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be exalted in the masajid, the houses of Allah. And then He mentioned ويذكر فيها اسمه يسبح له فيها. This is the salawat. In these masajid, there are men, those who glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they establish their salah in the masjid. And these people, these men, لا تلهيهم تجارة ولا بيع عن ذكر الله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة. There is no lahu. Al-lahu is anything that diverts the heart, whether it's something of amusement or distractions, whatever distractions there is. Whether it's food, drink, wealth, playing, whatever there is. Nothing distract them, and there is no trade or money going after money and provisions will take them away from the salah. رجال لا تلهيهم تجارة, trade. رجال لا تلهيهم تجارة ولا بيع عن ذكر الله وإقام الصلاة. Whether it's trade or buying and selling. And ذكر الله, from take them away from the remembrance of Allah, from the salah. These are the men that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised in the Quran. That means this is a command from Allah. This is in the level of what? This is in the level of Islam. This is the basics of the deen. This is the first thing that a person is supposed to be doing. So that means when we see ourselves lacking in this, then how can we talk about something that comes later? So we have to have that physical submission to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if it's for men, and you see how, since this is all for the family, we have the husband and the wife and the children and so on, and everyone, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless our families. It's all a together act of worship. So the men, they are coming to the masjid, they go to the masjid, and if they're close to the masjid, of course, they go to the masjid. If they're far from the masjid, their work take them away from the masjid, they establish the salah in whatever place that they're in. But the masjid is the place. As home for them, the same thing for the masajid for men. And this is clearly as stated in the ayat and the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and the hukm, the ruling of Salatul Jama'ah, which is a very obvious thing. And for the women at home, they pray at home, and the salah for them at home is much more rewardable than the salah in the masjid. And if they help their husbands and the men in the household to go to the masjid, they get the rewards of that. And there's also a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that proves that the women would get the same rewards as long as the men also that are doing their job. Of course, she's not responsible for his actions. So the same thing with the children that are raised to establish the salah. وَأْمُرْ أَهْلَكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ وَاصْطَبِرْ عَلَيْهَا لَا نَسْأَلُكَ رِزْقًا نَحْنُ نَرْزُقُكَ وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلتَّقْوَى وَأْمُرْ أَهْلَكَ. Command your family to establish the salah. وَاصْطَبِرْ عَلَيْهَا, and be patient. لَا نَسْأَلُكَ رِزْقًا, we don't ask you for rizq. The rizq, and as always mentioned, this is the trial, or this is the conflict that every person would have in his heart, that with al-iman, with faith and knowledge, a person has to overpower this, and this is where the submission comes in place. The hearts are always attached to the physical aspects of things, rizq, provisions, and the provisions doesn't have to be only money. Money and materialistic things and so on. This is the thing that always opposes the commands of Allah, or a person has a dispute in his heart with this, that distract him from that submission to the commands of Allah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most merciful, He make the matter easy for you if you are a believer. You're not asked for provisions, Allah will provide for you. Right? So when we think about the provisions, if you read the Quran, if you understand the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the provisions is also always attributed to Allah. You are going to be provided for, so relax. There's no need for you to be terrified and to be worried about it. Right? And again, we stay home, we don't take the means, and we just make salah all day long and all night long. Can you do that? Do it. This question always, when people say that, we say, no, it doesn't mean this way. No, let's just say, mashallah, you have that ability. Wallahi, if you pray all day and all night, right, who's the one that has that strength to pray all day and all night? It's just kalam, just talks. We just say things, but we don't really mean it. If we reach that stage, this is where the Prophet ﷺ got angry with those who came to one of the house of the Prophet ﷺ, and they were truthful people. These people, they reached and they worked on their own selves with the mujahada, with the striving upon their own selves, till they reach a stage where one would say, I would pray all night and I would never sleep. We don't often think of, can someone really do this? This is a very high level of effort and determination and struggle, such a great act of determination. And the other one says, I would fast every day, never break my fast. And the third one said, I would never get married. And you see how amazing is that the Prophet ﷺ got angry. Got angry because they're doing something not the way of the Prophet ﷺ. This is not the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And he said ﷺ, أَمَّا أَنَا, as for myself, فَأُصَلِّ وَأَنَامْ, that means I pray and I sleep, I fast and I break my fast, and I marry the women. فَمَنْ رَغِبَ عَنْ سُنَّتِي فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي, whoever turns away from my sunnah is not one of me. But this is to them. I'm asking a question. Have you ever seen someone like that in your entire life? I've never seen anyone. In our lifetime, people like this would say, I would pray all night, fast every day. It's just talk. Right? So this is where, yes, extremism, we are forbidden from it. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ got angry with. But we need to work on ourselves to at least, our requirements is what? Is to follow the way of the Prophet ﷺ. So we're not talking about praying all day and all night. We just want to follow the way of the Prophet ﷺ, and that is mandatory upon each and every one of us. So the level of Al-Islam, this is what we have to constantly work on, which is that submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes with ilm, with knowledge, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us with regards to the salah, and then you would find things happening by the will of Allah. And that's why the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, which is one of the things that Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, when he talked about the different mashahid, or the different things to witness for the salah, for the person to purify his heart, he mentioned mashhad as-sidq, to witness the truthfulness. The truthfulness, when a person is in the salah, he is truthful with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And before that is the ikhlas, sincerity, seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, because one of the things that takes the person away from really enjoying the beauty of the salah is that the heart is contaminated with showing off or turning to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the ikhlas, or the sincere intentions and seeking rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is not as pure as it should be. And the sidq is that whatever words we say in the salah, we are truthfully mean it. And that's what a sidq is. So the truthfulness that a person, he understands that the salah is the most important thing in our life. A sidq. truthfulness. So we ask ourselves this question: is the salah the most important act in our life? If we are challenged with other things other than the salah, would we choose the salah or the materialistic things of this life? And the common question that always been asked in all of the sessions is what? The question of the $1 million, right? If you're given $1 million to leave one salah, you know, and we don't have to answer, we need to see what's in our hearts. What do we prefer? What is the priority in our life? So if we find ourselves that there is something that can take us away from the salah, that means we have something to work on. We need to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we need to have that fear of Allah. The hearts are sick, it has diseases in it, because these hearts are supposed to be turning only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with at-tawheed, with humbling oneself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, full submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the sidq is with the words of the adhan, with the words of the salah, with the things that we say that we all memorize. Alhamdulillah, this is, we're talking to those who are in the masjid. And we, by the will of Allah, when we come to the masjid, that means this is a great level when we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not to praise oneself, but it's to give us encouragements because we're weak, right? But everything is to be attributed to Allah. But those who come to the masjid, right, that means they know the words of the adhan. We know what to say after the adhan for the most part. We know what to say, the words of al-iqamah. We know what to say in the salah, the pillars of the salah and the takbir and Sami Allahu liman hamida, and we know the meanings of it unless a person just embraces them. Surah Al-Fatiha, At-Tashahhud, what to say after coming up from ruku', what to say between the two sajdah. These words of the salah, are we saying them with sidq, or it's just some lip service that we're saying it and it doesn't really get into our hearts? So this is work to be done. We have to mean every word that we say, and that's the difference between the Sahaba and those who came after them. So having that sidq, or the truthfulness in the importance of the salah, in the words that we say in the salah, and to learn this one word after another, and the effect of that, and we talked about at-takbir, just this is the beginning of the salah, and the Surah Al-Fatiha with every verse of it, and so on. And this sidq, by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and by asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the ayat that we heard recently, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ لَهُ نُورًا فَمَا لَهُ مِن نُور. As-salah nur, the salah is light. And whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not give him that light, then there's no light for him. You cannot do it on your own. We all need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need the help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. القلوب بين إصبعين أصابع الرحمن يقلبه كيف يشاء. The hearts are in between two fingers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He changes them the way that He will subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that means what we need to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sincerely, and that's part of the truthfulness. And to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a complete submission and need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which brings the subject of the truthfulness. If it's the first thing that we will be asked about on the Day of Judgment, that means this is the most concern that we have in this life, the most important one. Then we need to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us and give us the ability to establish the salah in the most perfect way, and to guide us also to make sure that our families are upon the same thing. And Allahumma a'inni ala dhikrika wa shukrika wa husni ibadatik, and to constantly be in that state seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because if it's not from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's never going to happen. That's why al-iqbal ala salah is about turning to Allah. Turning to Allah. This is what the best, I guess, maybe there's better words to describe it. Al-iqbal ala Allah. When you come forward, that you're turning away from everything to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. This is when you leave your spot to go to the masjid. This is when you stand in the salah. This is when you make ruku'. This is when you make sujood. That focus. As we mentioned, as Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he said that at-takbir, which is the beginning of the salah, take care of two major concealments of the heart and covering of the heart. The arrogance, al-kibr, which is something that if it's present in the heart, it negates all actions. And the second thing, al-iltifat, the heart when it turns to other than Allah. The goal is that the heart is always focused and not turned to other than Allah. So this is one of the effects of the takbir in the salah from the beginning and every movement in the salah. So the truthfulness. The matter is, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it easy for us, and we have to work on this. And what contaminates this, what weakens this, which is the entire life of the believers, the sins takes away from this, contaminate the hearts. The heart becomes sick. And when the heart is sick, it turns to other than Allah, rely upon other than Allah. So the sins has its effect. So this is the case with every deed done by the heart. So if we need to have ikhlas, sincerity, truthfulness, to be pleased with Allah and so on, any of the sins that are committed affect these deeds in the heart, weakens the iman. And if the iman is weak, since the iman increases and decreases, increases with the good deeds, decreases with the bad deeds, so therefore that would affect the deeds of the heart, would affect the khushu', would affect the sidq. So another aspect to it is, after learning the different aspects of the salah, is to make sure that we are in constant repentance to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and guarding our hearts and our speech and our eyes and our ears and our actions and our earnings from the haram. So it's a job. And if a person is focused upon this so that the salah is done in the right way, it's worth it. So the subject of abandoning and leaving what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade, for the person to have his heart turned to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, as we all know, he said, وَجُعِلَتْ قُرَّةُ عَيْنِي فِي الصَّلَاةِ. And this is part of hadith. وَجُعِلَتْ قُرَّةُ عَيْنِي فِي الصَّلَاةِ. It has been made the comfort of my eye in the salah. So, and we are commanded to follow the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So what is the meaning? قُرَّةُ الْعَيْنِ is the comfort of the eye. That means this is where there's no distractions. When someone finally finds something that he loves dearly and it's the best thing in the world, if you think of something physical, for example, and this is the most beautiful thing, there's nothing beyond this. That means the heart will be what? Instead of sukoon, not distracted anymore, not going for something better. This is the highest thing, there's nothing more than this. And this does not exist in the physical world. So when someone is not distracted and he's satisfied fully with what a person is given, this is the comfort of his eye. He's not distracted anymore. And the Prophet ﷺ, this was made for him in the salah. وَجُعِلَتْ قُرَّةُ عَيْنِي فِي الصَّلَاةِ. Nothing is more satisfying to the Prophet ﷺ than the salah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to follow the way of the Prophet ﷺ. And when you see وَجُعِلَتْ قُرَّةُ عَيْنِي فِي, the comfort of my eyes has been made in the salah. What's fi the salah signifies? That means when he enters the salah, right? Once he says Allahu Akbar, this is the comfort of his eyes. This is the utmost satisfaction that he receives, alayhi salatu wassalam. Fi salah, wa ju'ilat. And ju'ilat, mabni al-majhul, that means it's passive tense. It's been made. Who's the one that made this to the Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's from Allah, because the hearts are owned by Allah. So when a person knows this and he's commanded to be upon this, and this is what we need to be upon, then the heart would not turn to no one but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and turn to him to ask him, and then to take the level of submission, the physical actions. If you submit yourself physically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, by his mercy, get your heart to be what you want it to be. If you start with the heart, it doesn't work. If you start by having, or you want to have the khushu', you don't own it. You cannot control your heart. But you are, by the will of Allah, still we don't control anything. But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell you walk, then you can have the ability to walk, then you walk. Right? The other things will come, will follow. Just put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we talked about that before. وَدُخُلُوا عَلَيْهِمُ الْبَابِ فَإِذَا دَخَلْتُمُوهُ فَإِنَّكُمْ غَالِبُونَ. The Amalik, the ones that they could not fight, the people of Bani Israel. They said, we cannot fight them, they'll defeat us. So the command is, this is the command of Allah. Yes, Allah commanded you to go. They are overpowering you, you cannot do it physically, but He commanded you to do. He knows best. So therefore what? udkhulu alayhimul bab. You're able to enter the door. Can you do that? Can you break the door and enter? What's beyond the door is beyond your capacity. Don't worry about it. Just fulfill the commands of Allah. If you do that, فَإِنَّكُمْ غَالِبُونَ. If you fulfill the commands of Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you the victory, which is beyond your reason and understanding. And this is one of the afat, one of the miseries of the human beings. When they think that their aql, their reason, can take them all the way to the end. No, you're deficient. You don't have that capacity. Don't think of how this would lead to this, to lead to this. This is not in our capacity. It is sufficient for us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to do this. And this is a command from Allah. He ordered us to establish the salah regardless, to do it in the most perfect way. Then you are commanded so that you are tested whether you bring forward or obstruct this command with your reasoning. But if I do this, how am I going to receive this? Or what's the end of this? Just submit yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, leave the matter to Allah. Rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring your heart. He's the owner of the heart. So therefore, وَجُعِلَتْ قُرَّةُ عَيْنِي فِي الصَّلَاةِ. It's all by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once he entered the salah alayhi salatu wassalam, and with the matters of belief and the hereafter and this worldly life, materialistic things versus the hereafter. The other thing is when the raha, the comfort, the rest of one's distractions and tiredness, as the Prophet ﷺ would say, أَرِحْنَا بِهَا يَا بِلَالِ. أَرِحْنَا بِهَا يَا بِلَالِ. He would say to Bilal, because he's the mu'adhin, and he would give the iqamah. So he would say to him, ﷺ, أَرِحْنَا بِهَا. أَرِحْنَا, what's al-raha? Al-raha is when someone is working so hard, and he's extremely tired, he wants to do what? He wants to rest. So al-raha is never to be perceived unless that there are difficulty or effort is being done. Because the raha, from the raha, it's laziness and it's just terrible, right? So if someone is just resting all day, resting from what? You're resting for rest. But if you're working hard, the rest afterwards is a beautiful thing. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying to Bilal, أَرِحْنَا بِهَا. Make us rest. Rest from what? Rest from the dunya. This dunya matters, this physical things in this life is tiring to the hearts of the believers. It's tiring for them. Why? Because it distracts them away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most beloved to them. So therefore, arihna biha, and here biha, not fi. Right? That means by the salah. The salah is the raha. The salah is the rest of the Prophet, the way to rest for the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. Opposite to those who would say, arihna minha wal a'yadu billah. When someone says, give us the rest, minha, that means let's just make our salah so that we can rest. We have to make the salah. So that's why people are in different levels with this. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us. Salah is an obligation, and you are among those who make the salah. But it's a difficult task. And the worldly life is the thing that is our hearts are attached to. So let's just make the salah so that we can enjoy ourselves. So that we can enjoy the food, enjoy the entertainment, enjoy this and that. The Prophet ﷺ, his rest was in the salah. Is that an attainable level? Yes, it is. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also to forgive us. We're just narrating, but it doesn't mean that we, so is it attainable? Yes, because this is what the Prophet ﷺ was upon, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to follow the way of the Prophet ﷺ. But all of these things requires mujahada, requires effort, requires patience, requires turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, this sidq, this truthfulness, this ikhlas, and to put forward the hereafter before anything, to purify ourselves from sins. And if someone thinks that this is overwhelming, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. So at least we have to establish the salah in the most perfect way and to submit ourselves and to give it in our hearts the importance of it. Nothing is more important than the salah. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, inshallah we'll finish very soon, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِعِينَ. So this is the means to establish that, and the rest of the heart and the rejuvenating the heart and to establish the secrets of the salah is وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. Seek help in patience and in salah. وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِعِينَ. And indeed it's kabira. And the first meaning of the tafsir of the ayah, that means it refers to the salah. وَإِنَّهَا, the dhamir here refers to the salah. Salah is kabira, is a huge thing. إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِعِينَ, except for those who khashi'in. So that means if the salah is difficult, that means what's the problem is in what? Is in the khushu'. That means we need to establish the khushu', and the khushu' is the subject. But the first part of the ayah, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. As-sabr, according to some, is as-sawm, fasting, which is the ibadah of as-sabr. But this is whether it's a tafsir by an example or the sabr in the general term. You need to seek help and patience. So you want to make the salah the most important thing in your life. Be patient. Be patient in what? In making the salah, in establishing the salah. Again, do it physically because we don't have an excuse. If you're someone that you're not able to stand, you have an excuse, but you still have to pray. Right? So to seek help and patience. You don't feel like going to the masjid. Just go to the masjid. You don't feel like this, you don't feel like that. It's difficult for me to wake up. The $1 million will wake you up. That means there's a disease in the heart. So be patient. وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. Seek help in the salah to make salah. As the ulama they say. So you want to make salah good, make more salah. It's difficult. Then the khushu' needs to be fixed. وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِعِينَ. Al-khushu' is when someone is humbled. When someone's heart is knowing that his position as a human being, he is in need of Allah. We cannot do anything except by the help and the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The heart is not distracted into this materialistic things of this life. The heart is attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. But the subject of al-khushu', which inshallah ta'ala we can talk about it later, but it's a continuous subject. And it's also a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for those who fulfill the submission physically to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as simple as it sounds, to make salah or to be helped to make salah, make more salah. And there are practical means to this. For example, you make it as an obligation upon yourself that you come to the masjid. And in the beginning it's difficult, after sometimes it becomes easy. Make it as if it's an obligation upon you that once you finish the fard or before the fard, you make sure that the sunnah prayers are never to be missed. And once a person gets used to this, he would never be able to leave it. Especially that if it's attached to the fard, you don't delay it. So you find yourself making the fard salah and the sunnah salah, the 12 rak'ah of sunnah. Right? And if a person sees himself, and الإنسان على نفسه بصيرة, we should be aware of our weaknesses. So when the best place to pray the sunnah is at home, but then you see yourself every time you go home, you miss it. Right? So that means what? That means make sure that you pray it in the masjid before you do anything. And once it's attached to the fard like this, you would feel terrible if you miss it. So that means you would always make it. So fulfilling the obligations, being patient with that, doing the optional acts of the salah, sunnah prayer, the night prayer, start with something that a person can be consistent in doing, whether it's 2 or 4 or 6. And you don't feel like it, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because one of the signs of the hypocrites, وَإِذَا قَامُوا إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ قَامُوا كُسَالًا يُرَاءُونَ النَّاسَ وَلَا يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about the hypocrites, whenever they would get up for the salah, قَامُوا كُسَالًا, they would get up lazy, with laziness. Right? And they show off with their ibadah. So as the ulama, they say, you're tired. When you're tired and you're coming to the masjid and you're enduring patience, don't look lazy. Right? It's not showing off. You're making takalluf, right? You know what the word takalluf, right? It's in Urdu takalluf too, right? But I'm not, any other languages? That means you go out of your way. You're not at your own ease. People think that if I'm lazy, so I look lazy. I'm tired, I look tired. No, don't be like this. Pretend to be the most energetic person when you come to the salah, so that you don't imitate physically how the hypocrites are. You're not showing off. You're trying to cure the disease in the heart, so that therefore you would act as if you're energetic coming to the masjid, to the best of one's ability, of course. And that's why even when Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, when he talked about Salatul Jama'ah, when he said that وَأَنَّ الرَّجُلْ لَا يُهَادَ بَيْنَ الرَّجُلَيْنِ حَتَّى يُقَامْ فِي الصَّفِّ, that when he said that it was known at the time of the Prophet ﷺ that Salatul Jama'ah لا يتخلف عنها إلا منافق معلوم النفاق. The ones that used to miss Salatul Jama'ah in the masjid are the hypocrites, those who are well known to be hypocrites. No one knows the hypocrites, because hypocrisy, where it's placed, it's in the heart, not physically. But someone معلوم النفاق, someone that is well known that he's a hypocrite, that means he's a very deep level of hypocrisy. So because the hypocrites, they used to come to the masjid and pray in Salat al-Jama'ah with the Prophet ﷺ. And he said ﷺ, أثقل الصلاة على المنافقين الفجر والعشاء. The two heaviest salah on the munafiqeen is Fajr and Isha. وَلَوْ يَعْلَمُونَ مَا فِيهِمَا لَأْتَوْهُمَا وَلَوْ حَبْوَا. And if they know what's in it in rewards, they would come to it even if they have to crawl. Why? Because it's dark and nobody will pay attention who's in the masjid anyway, and the hypocrites that just want to show off. So they would not come for Fajr and Isha. But someone ma'loom al-nifaq, these are the ones that would not come to the masjid. Ma'loom al-nifaq. So not to imitate them and to seek the means of curing our hearts, because this can be a dangerous sign. So therefore a person have the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from hypocrisy. And therefore if you remember the hadith, once a person have that diligency and mujahadatul nafs, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا نَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا, we have to exert ourselves. And this is something that for the young and the old and everyone, things does not happen like that by ease. We have to put effort. People put effort in matters of dunya, people go to school, people work many hours, and these are all means for us to be exposed to our own selves. That we're not lazy, it's not beyond our capacities. The matter is very easy, but it's the diseases in the heart and choosing this worldly life over the hereafter and many other diseases that we need to overcome. And once a person passes that stage with the help of Allah and being patient, then the matter becomes easier and easier. And this is by the mercy of Allah as a sign of the truthfulness of the person. And if you remember the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that shows how the believers, their attachment to the Salah. And this is in Sunan Ibn Majah, and it's a sound hadith, that when the mayyit, إِذَا أُدْخِلَ الْمَيِّتُ الْقَبْرِ, when the dead person, he is entered the grave, when he died and he's in the grave, مُثِّلَتْ لَهُ الشَّمْسُ عِنْدَ غُرُوبِهَا. And it's a sound hadith. الشَّمْس, the sun, will be made for that believer as if it's setting, the sun is setting. So مُثِّلَتْ لَهُ الشَّمْس. He would see that in his grave as if the sun is setting. فَيَجْلِسُ يَمْسَحُ عَيْنَيْهِ. He would sit and rub his eyes like this, or wipe his eyes. Like when someone wakes up from sleep, so the dead person would do this. يَمْسَحُ عَيْنَيْهِ وَيَقُولْ دَعُونِي أُصَلِّي. He would say, let me make my salah. He would say, let me make my salah. So as if he would think that he's still alive. As the ulama they say in explaining the hadith. And what is the concern for him in the grave? He's going to miss the salah. So if a person has that level of the guarding his salah, that he's terrified, the sun is close to sunset and I did not make the salah, it's a good sign that he's among the believers. And this is a good sign for him that this will happen to him in the grave. And it shows even the ease of the affairs of the believers in the grave, which is the most fearful place. But for the believers, as if he's alive, let me make my salah. He would say that to them. دعوني أصلي. So life is short, and we need to have that admonition to our hearts and to remind ourselves. And with all of this has to be with the proper belief, with matters of the tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, following the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And one of the great means to achieve this is to be attached to the early generations of Islam. So when we say always that we have to follow the way of as-Salafus Salih, the early generations of Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserved their lives for us for a reason. Look into how their salah used to be, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. It's amazing how the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and if we talk just as a subject, the salah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And as mentioned in the Battle of Badr, the next day is the Battle of Badr, and the disbelievers are 3 times more in number than the believers. And there's no means whatsoever in this worldly life that would say that the believers will even have a decent defeat, right? Let alone to be victorious. And the Prophet ﷺ standing the entire night in Salah. And he's Rasulullah. He's the messenger of Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that commanding him. But the entire night in the Salah. This is how the Salah is. And therefore we would understand what's happening, right? And how the importance of these actions in our life. So the Salah of the Prophet ﷺ and his night prayer, making Salah till his leg would swell ﷺ. You have the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. When the Prophet ﷺ in his deathbed, and he would say, Muru Abu Bakr falyusalli bin nas, command Abu Bakr to make the Salah, to lead the people. And Aisha radiallahu anha, she said that Abu Bakr, that he weeps quickly, and command Umar, that means the Salah of Abu Bakr. Every time he leads the Salah, and he's the Siddiq. And Umar radiallahu anhu, they would hear his weeping from behind the lines when he would recite the Quran, and how their Salah And these are the people, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, Ubay ibn Ka'b, others, the tabi'een, and their salah, and because they understood the importance of it. And it doesn't mean that they neglected their lives, as someone would start asking these silly questions. They were the best, as someone described them. They are during the night, ruhbanun bil-layl, if it's correct to say, that they are devoted in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during the night, and there are nights during the day, warriors and doing all of the different actions, not lazy during the day and sleeping during the night. So this is to go back and to read about them and to see how the salah was in their life, whether it's themselves, the women, and how the children are raised. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from the evil within our own selves. And we'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala. And inshallah, we can have the means to continue that, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. Anything that need to be clarified? Any questions? Is the food ready? Tell them.
Ask about like the importance of like praying Salah on time, so like after the adhan is given, versus like delaying it and like just like praying before like the next Salah.
Now, the importance of praying the Salah on time, the beginning of its time versus delaying it. What we talked about is this level of Al-Islam, and I want to make sure that this is clear to all of us. When it comes to the level of Al-Islam in the Salah, that means we have to learn all of the different texts that came with regards to the Salah. What physical actions we're supposed to be upon when it comes to the Salah to fulfill the first level, which is the level of Al-Islam. And one of which is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, أَحَبُّ الْأَعْمَالِ إِلَى اللَّهِ, the most beloved deeds to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, الصَّلَاةُ عَلَى وَقْتِهَا, to pray the Salah in its prescribed time. And some of the narrations, في أول, in the beginning of the time of the Salah. This is the case, except Salatul Isha, the best of its time in the middle of the night, if people are doing that in the masjid. And the beginning of the time doesn't have to be right after the adhan, of course. And the Prophet ﷺ, whenever the adhan is called, that he would give time, حتى يعتصر المعتصر, as they say. If someone wants to squeeze his stomach, that means he goes to the bathroom. Enough time for a person, when he hears the adhan, it's okay to have a valid ghafla, to have a valid forgetfulness. If it's correct to say, you're busy with your work, there's nothing wrong with that. You think that you're doing surgery as a physician, and you have to, while you're making surgery, your heart and your tongue is in the remembrance of Allah. No, of course, you're focused on your thing. That's absolutely fine. But then, say for example, the adhan is called. So Shara give you the chance that once the adhan is called, that's the importance of hearing the adhan, then you detach yourself. And then you would have time to go to the bathroom, to clean oneself, to make wudu, things like this. The Prophet ﷺ would wait, and once the people, they would come, and then the salah is established. And that's why one of the disadvantages that we have in the environments that we're in, that we come to the masajid based on the iqamah time. We wish we can change that. We should come to the masjid based on the adhan time, not based on the iqamah time. What happens if it's based on the iqamah time? Human beings are like this. If it's on the iqamah time, we will be late for the salah. But if it's for the adhan time, then we come and we make it, inshallah ta'ala, and we make the salah. So, and this is actually some of the masajid here in the West I've seen, which is a good thing actually. Maybe inshallah, hopefully, I'm just trying to throw it out there so that maybe we can do that change slowly, inshallah. Their salah is based on the adhan, right? So even if we say Salatul Isha 1 hour after the adhan, fine. But it's after the adhan. So our minds, our hearts are attached to the adhan, right? So that means we come early to the salah. But the question is, can a person delay the salah? Once the adhan is called, the concern is how to make the salah immediately. Unless there is something that would distract the person, or it's a matter of necessity that he is not able to make the salah in the beginning of its time. If it's a necessity, it's obvious. If it's something that would distract his heart, like eating, like going to the bathroom, as the Prophet ﷺ said, La salah حضرة الطعام, there's no salah when the food is present, and there's no salah بمدافعة الأخبثين when a person is struggling with his own self, he wants to go to the bathroom. So why? Because it distracts the person. So to take care of these needs so that the person have the time to make the salah. The same thing if a person is busy with something at his work, if he can finish it earlier, of course, if he has the importance of the salah, if he's able to do so, or if it happens so that he is able to make the salah on the beginning of its time. That's why there is time from salah to the other for the needs, for the necessities, and that should be the exceptional situation, not the norm of the Muslim. Almost time. Are we ready? Oh, so, okay. So we're, everyone to go upstairs, inshallah, and the kids downstairs. Anything else, inshallah? Barakallahu feekum. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for each and every one of us, inshallah. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam, baraka Muhammad wa sahbihi wa sallam.
Alaikum. Just a reminder, the kids, please stay downstairs to allow more room for the adults upstairs. And also, as you walk out, the brothers have the donation box. Anybody would like to donate towards the dinner expenses on a monthly basis. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum. When you come back.